Barron Trump's shocking Christmas Eve rescue that left a village in tears. Barron Trump, craving solitude and escape from the spotlight, set off to spend Christmas alone in the mountains. The snow fell lightly as he drove, but his thoughts were heavier, reflecting on how Christmas had lost its magic over the years. Suddenly, the storm intensified, and the peaceful drive turned dangerous. Snow blinded the road, and in an instant, his car hit black ice, skidding violently into a snowbank. The engine died, leaving him stranded in the freezing wilderness. With no signal and the storm howling, Barron had no choice but to step into the icy night, fighting through the snow in search of help. Little did he know, this storm was about to lead him to a moment that would change his life and an entire village. Forever. The storm showed no mercy as Barron Trump pressed forward, the biting wind cutting through his coat like shards of ice. Each step felt heavier than the last, and just as his strength began to falter, a faint light flickered through the swirling snow. Desperation spurred him on, and he stumbled toward it, his frozen hands clinging to hope. The light belonged to a small weathered cabin, its windows glowing faintly against the storm's fury. Barron knocked, his breath visible in the icy air. The door creaked open, revealing an elderly man with piercing eyes and a cautious demeanor. Behind him stood a young girl, her wide eyes filled with both curiosity and wariness. "What are you doing out here in this storm?" the man asked gruffly. Barron, exhausted and shivering, explained his situation. The man hesitated, his protective instincts evident, but the girl, no older than 8, tugged on his sleeve. "Grandpa, we can't leave him out there." The man sighed, stepping aside to let Barron in. "I'm Wallace," he said curtly. "This is Lucy. Don't touch anything." Inside, the cabin was small and modest, with mismatched furniture and a fire that barely warmed the room. Lucy offered Barron a blanket, her kindness in stark contrast to her grandfather's stern exterior. Grateful, Barron sank into a chair by the fire, the warmth slowly bringing life back to his frozen limbs. As the storm raged outside, Barron began to notice the signs of a hard life around him. The patched curtains, the fraying rug, the way Mr. Wallace carefully rationed firewood. Yet, despite their modest means, Lucy hummed softly as she helped prepare a simple meal, her spirit unbroken by the harshness around her. During dinner, Barron learned of the struggles faced by the nearby village. Once a thriving community, it had been devastated by economic hardship. The storm had only worsened their plight, cutting off power and supplies. Still, Mr. Wallace and Lucy were determined to host a modest Christmas dinner for the struggling families, using what little they had to bring some joy to others. Barron listened, humbled by their resilience and selflessness. These people, with so little to give, were still willing to share what they had. As Lucy placed a bowl of soup in front of him, her eyes lit with excitement for the coming celebration, Barron felt something stir within him, a flicker of warmth he hadn't felt in years. That night, as he lay on the makeshift bed they'd prepared for him, Barron couldn't stop thinking about their generosity. He had sought solitude to escape the hollowness of his life, but here, in this small cabin, surrounded by people who gave without expecting anything in return, he began to wonder if Christmas still held a kind of magic he had forgotten. What he didn't know was that this night, and the storm still raging outside, was about to test them all in ways none of them could have imagined. The storm outside raged on through the night, its howling winds rattling the fragile windows of the cabin. Barron, now warm and rested, sat by the fire, listening to Lucy hum a quiet Christmas tune as Mr. Wallace stirred the coals. It was a fragile moment of calm amidst the chaos, but it wouldn't last. Suddenly, a frantic knock echoed through the cabin, cutting through the sound of the storm. Mr. Wallace frowned as he opened the door, revealing a woman bundled in layers of wet, snow-covered clothing. Her face was pale, her voice trembling with desperation. "Please," she gasped, her words barely audible over the wind. "My son, Timmy, he's missing." Barron stood, alarmed as the woman explained. Her son, a boy no older than 10, had ventured into the woods hours earlier. She tried to stop him, but he insisted on finding a rare flower for his sister, a gift to make their Christmas special despite their struggles. Now, with the storm growing fiercer, Timmy hadn't returned, and the mother was terrified he wouldn't survive the night. Mr. Wallace hesitated. "The woods in this storm, it's too dangerous. We'll barely see a foot in front of us." The woman's voice cracked as she pleaded, "Please. He's all I have. Someone has to help him." Barron felt a knot tighten in his chest. He knew the risks. Venturing out in a blizzard like this could be fatal. But something about the woman's desperation, the thought of that boy, alone in the freezing darkness, struck a chord deep within him. "I'll go," Barron said firmly, surprising even himself. Mr. Wallace turned to him, brows furrowed. You? You don't know these woods. It's suicide." "Then show me," Barron replied. "We can't just do nothing." Reluctantly, Mr. Wallace grabbed a flashlight and a thick coat, muttering under his breath about the recklessness of the idea. They gathered what supplies they could, blankets, ropes, and extra lights, and stepped out into the blinding snow. A few villagers joined them, their faces grim but determined. The forest was a frozen labyrinth, the trees bending under the weight of the snow. The wind howled through the branches, carrying the faint echoes of their shouts as they called Timmy's name. The cold was relentless, seeping through layers of clothing and biting at their skin. Barron stumbled over a hidden root, his flashlight flickering as he pushed himself back up. Every step felt heavier, the snow dragging at his legs. He could barely see the others, their figures blurred by the swirling white. "This way!" Mr. Wallace shouted, his voice nearly lost in the storm. He had spotted faint tracks leading deeper into the woods. Barron followed, his breath coming in ragged bursts as he forced himself forward. The further they went, the more treacherous the terrain became. Ice slicked the ground beneath their boots, and branches snapped ominously overhead. Yet, through it all, Barron pressed on, driven by something he couldn't quite explain, a need to prove to himself, and perhaps to the boy he had never met, that someone would come for him. As the night wore on, hope flickered like the weak beam of their flashlights, but Barron refused to give up. Somewhere out there, a boy was waiting, and for the first time in years, Barron felt the weight of responsibility in a way he couldn't ignore. The search was far from over, but in his heart, Barron knew this night wasn't just about finding Timmy. It was about finding something within himself that he had long thought lost. The storm showed no mercy, and as the search stretched on, the group began to splinter. Barron, determined to keep going, veered away from the others, following faint tracks that led deeper into the woods. The snow muffled every sound, and the wind clawed at his face. But something in his gut told him he was on the right path. Then, through the swirling white, he saw it, a small, broken-down shed half buried in snow. He approached cautiously, his flashlight cutting through the dark interior. "Timmy," Barron called out, his voice trembling with urgency. A weak, muffled sound came from the corner. Barron rushed inside and found the boy huddled against the wall, clutching a small, frozen flower in his hands. His face was pale, his lips blue, and his body barely moved as he shivered violently. "Timmy, it's okay," Barron said, kneeling beside him. "I've got you now." The boy's eyes fluttered open, his voice barely a whisper. I needed to get this for my sister. It's for her, so she knows Dad still loves her." Barron's chest tightened as he realized the flower wasn't just a gift. It was a symbol of the boy's determination to honor his late father, who had always brought the same flower home for Christmas. "Hold on, Timmy," Barron said, wrapping his own coat around the boy's frail body. The cold seeped into his own skin immediately, but he didn't care. "We're going home." Lifting Timmy into his arms, Barron stepped back into the blizzard. The wind howled, the snow stung his face, and every step felt like dragging himself through quicksand. Timmy's small weight felt heavier with each passing moment, and exhaustion clawed at Barron's body. "Don't fall asleep," Barron urged Timmy, his voice strained but firm. "We're almost there, just stay with me." Timmy's faint voice broke through the storm. "Dad used to say the flower meant hope. It's what Christmas is all about." Barron gritted his teeth, pushing through the freezing pain. His legs burned, his hands felt numb, but he refused to stop. Timmy's words echoed in his mind. Hope. It wasn't just for the boy. It was for everyone waiting back at the cabin, praying for a miracle. The first light of dawn pierced through the heavy storm clouds as Barron staggered toward the cabin, his body trembling from exhaustion. Timmy still wrapped in his arms. His breaths were ragged, each step feeling like it might be his last, but the faint warmth of the cabin's glow spurred him on. The door burst open before he even reached it, and Mr. Wallace and a group of villagers rushed out, their faces etched with equal parts relief and disbelief. "He is there! He found him!" someone shouted. Timmy's mother broke through the crowd, her cries of joy echoing in the cold air. She took her son into her arms, tears streaming down her face as she whispered words of gratitude. Barron barely registered her words, his legs buckling beneath him as he fell to his knees. "Get him inside," Mr. Wallace barked, and strong hands lifted Barron, carrying him into the warmth of the cabin. Inside, the fire roared, and the room buzzed with a mixture of urgency and relief. As blankets were piled on him and hot tea was pressed into his shaking hands, Barron's body began to thaw, the searing cold replaced by a heavy exhaustion. Timmy, now wrapped in layers and cradled by his mother, stirred and smiled faintly. "He's going to be okay," someone said, and a cheer erupted in the room. But as the villagers celebrated, Barron stayed silent, his mind replaying the harrowing journey through the storm. He hadn't expected to survive, let alone succeed. And yet here he was, surrounded by people whose gratitude was more powerful than any material reward he had ever received. Later, as the cabin settled into a peaceful hush, Mr. Wallace approached Barron, holding something in his calloused hands. It was a small wooden ornament, carved with intricate care into the shape of a star. "Here," Mr. Wallace said gruffly, placing it in Barron's hands. "We don't have much, but this is for you, a reminder of what you did tonight. For Timmy, for all of us." Barron turned the ornament over in his hands, its rough edges warm against his skin. For the first time in years, he felt something stir deep within him. A sense of connection, of meaning. The villagers, now gathered in the cabin, began to share stories and laughter, their spirits lifted by Timmy's safe return. A simple meal was prepared, and though it was modest, the love and gratitude in the room made it feel like a feast. Lucy sat beside Barron, her face glowing with excitement as she talked about the decorations they'd planned for the village. As the sun rose higher, casting a golden glow over the snow-covered landscape, Barron looked around the room. These people, who had so little, had shown him more warmth and kindness than he had ever thought possible. This was Christmas, he realized. Not the glitz, not the gifts, but the spirit of giving and the power of human connection. And for the first time in years, Barron felt at peace. As the storm lifted, the village began to come alive again. Rays of sunlight glistened on the snow, and the once ominous woods now looked peaceful. Inside the small cabin, Barron Trump sat by the fire, watching Timmy play with his sister, their laughter filling the room. For the first time in years, Barron felt something stir within him. Not pride, not obligation, but a quiet sense of fulfillment. The events of the past night had changed him. He had risked everything to bring Timmy back, not because he sought recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. Yet, as he observed the struggles of the villagers, their resilience despite having so little, Barron couldn't shake the thought there was more he could do for them. Something lasting. Barron made his decision that evening, but he said nothing to the villagers. Instead, as they celebrated Timmy's safe return with warmth and laughter, Barron quietly listened, taking note of their stories, their needs, and their dreams. He stayed in the background, absorbing the spirit of the community, a spirit of hope, perseverance, and kindness that humbled him. Later, as he stood outside the cabin, watching the snow fall gently, he pulled out his phone. Though the village was remote, Barron had the resources to bring change. Calls were made, plans were set in motion, but he made it clear this would be anonymous. No grand gestures, no speeches, no attention. The gift would be from the heart, just as theirs had been to him. The next morning, the villagers gathered to see Barron off. The storm had cleared and the children were already outside, building snowmen and playing in the sparkling white drifts. Timmy, his cheeks rosy with health, ran up to Barron, holding something in his hands. "It's for you," Timmy said, offering the once frozen flower. It had thawed overnight, its petals now vibrant and alive. "It's hope. Like Dad always said. You showed me that last night." Barron knelt, taking the delicate flower with care. "Thank you, Timmy. I'll keep this always." As the villagers waved goodbye, Barron climbed into the car that would take him back to his world. But he left a part of himself behind. He carried with him not just the flower, but the promise he'd made silently to himself, to ensure this village would never again face such hardship alone. Months later, the village began to see quiet miracles. New supplies and repairs arrived without explanation. Scholarships for the children appeared, lifting the burden from families who had long struggled. Slowly, the community flourished, though no one knew who was behind it. And Barron? He never returned, at least not in person. But every Christmas, as he hung a small wooden ornament on his tree and placed Timmy's flower in its frame, he thought of the people who had shown him the true meaning of the season: selflessness, hope, and the quiet magic of giving without expectation. Though the villagers never learned his name, his kindness would live on in their stories, passed down from generation to generation, a quiet legacy born of a stormy Christmas night. Though this tale of Barron Trump's shocking Christmas Eve rescue that left a village in tears is a work of fiction, it carries a powerful message. It reminds us that even in the darkest of times, acts of kindness, whether grand or small, have the power to change lives. The story isn't just about Barron or the village, it's about the spirit of giving, the courage to step up when it matters most, and the quiet strength found in selflessness. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What did this story mean to you? Did it inspire you to think differently about kindness or giving? Share your reflections in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next emotional tale. Thank you for spending time with us today. Your support makes it possible for us to share stories like this, and we're grateful to have you here. Let's keep spreading hope, one story at a time. Happy holidays, and may the true spirit of Christmas be with you all.